Okay, it says we're live. This is, as you can see on the title, part 2 of Bible prophecy. And in part 1, if you haven't seen it, I did a kind of an intro on all the Old Testament prophecies that have some future applications. Some may have been partially fulfilled before. Others, it's up for grabs as to whether it has or not, but I took a quick look at those. And I'm going to be presenting my prophecy book that I was quoting from and try to pick up where we left off. And if from time to time I might stop and, if I find a good stopping point, as I did before, and take some questions. I want to thank Larry's on the panel here. He's going to try to help watch for those and let me know if we'll wait till there's a break to do the questions and try to keep them relevant to what we're talking about here. Hey, Vic, good. Thanks for showing up. And I think I'm going to just go ahead and get started. Let me present the page. I almost forgot to do that. 1 second. All right. I want to make sure first that everybody sees that on the watch page, and then I'll get started. Because I know there's a delay, so I wanted to wait and make sure that was happening. All right, I think that's up. And in case you haven't seen the book, it's right here. I can put the link in the public chat. Let me do that real quick, because there's a lot I'm not going to go over in here. Obviously, I'm not going to read the whole book. Mostly, I wanted to just pick up the overview to know that there are a bunch of Old Testament prophecies. It's not just Revelation. And there's even stuff in the New Testament that's not part of the book of Revelation that had some prophecies in it, or bits and pieces of it. And so let's get into Revelation. This is what I have here, just a quick, very short summary, very oversimplified, and then I'll get into my Greek interlinear translation and commentary, and there's a little bits of other material to stop and explain things as I go along. And this, of course, my standard disclaimer is my opinion. If people want other people's opinions, they have to ask the other people. So, of course, this is just going to be my opinions. I don't claim to have expertise or authority. So here we go. I think since I start here, I'm just going to quickly highlight this, not read it all to you. Revelation will start out with a vision. The Apostle John, the setting is that he was exiled on the Isle of Patmos. That's where the revelation was given. And you can see here on one of my blogs, I did a whole blog post on the 7 churches that this prophecy was sent to. And here you can see that these are all along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea in what is now Turkey. In Bible times, it was just called Asia. And the 7 churches are all pretty much grouped together here. The island where John, I hope I said John before, I hope I didn't say Paul or something, but he was exiled by the Roman Emperor Domitian in the late 90s AD. And that is the island of Patmos where he was put. You can see it's kind of southeast of Athens, north of Crete, south of Ephesus, and there's all these 7 churches. Why 7? 7, of course, is a typical number that you'll find in the Bible, a number of God, number of perfection. But these also happen to be in this area where John could look across the water and see the land where they were. Of course, some of them were several hundred miles inland, is my understanding. But the reason these were chosen certainly has more significance than just that they were nearby, because they each had a different set of attributes. And so you got to kind of read between the lines on what's the message being conveyed here, Jesus is conveying to him about why he's sending this prophecy to these particular churches, because conspicuous by its absence, for example, is the church at Jerusalem. These were not the most prominent churches, and they weren't the sum total of churches. And so there's reasons we need to keep in mind and ask ourselves as we go along why they were sent to these particular churches. In this article, and I will post that link, I want to make sure I do that as I go along. And there's a link in here to a place that you can go and see on Google Maps called the Cave of the Apocalypse. I'm not going to stop and do that right now, but that's what it's called. So there's a place on the island that is named after this revelation that was given to John. 95, 96 AD is when this happened. Some people, as I mentioned, preterism, I looked it up to make sure I was pronouncing it right. It is preterism. The idea that all prophecy has been fulfilled, that's full preterism. There's partial, and I'm not going to get back into that. But they absolutely require a revelation to have been written before the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. So they predate the book to then, or they say, okay, we can't disprove that the book wasn't written until the late 90s. So we'll say that the revelation itself happened many years before, 30 years before, even though it wasn't written then, just so they can make it fulfilled in AD 70. But that doesn't work for me. They can't hide the fact that it was the Roman Emperor Domitian who had John exiled, and that he was exiled when the revelation was given. And so I don't think there's any support for preterism on that basis. But at any rate, this was the late 1st century AD when this happened. And as for the argument, just very quickly here, that this was just a bitter old man's hallucination or rant against Rome, that doesn't hold up either when you look at the details, and not even secular Wikipedia believes that story anymore. They don't believe that he was just bitter. They even agree that it was written by at least 89 AD. Now, we have the 7 churches that this Revelation was written to, but I'm going to switch back here and read the first chapter of Revelation, because we don't get into the actual words that Jesus says to these churches until chapters 2 and 3. So let me skip over to this one. I thought I had that preloaded. I guess I did, and it was just slow to come up there. Let me give you that link. And just one second. Okay, this is Greek interlinear here, and I'm just going to go through here. I like to show some of the Greek words as I go along. This is, notice you start out the revelation of anointed Jesus. I use the word anointed because that's what Christ means in Greek. There you can see the word Christos. It's equivalent to Messiah. I said that in the first hangout. It's his revelation. It's not something that John originated. It's something John received from Jesus while he was on this island. And it's to show to the word, he uses the word slaves here, excuse me, doulos, and I went to look that up. This isn't my favorite lexicon, but it's the easiest one to use online without being part of a university or something. And you can see that it wasn't just a slave. It was metaphorically used as one who gives himself up to another's will, whose service is used by Christ in extending and advancing his cause among men. So this is a general term for someone who has given up their will to someone else. Okay, in this case, it is Jesus. So that's how they're using the word slave in the book of Revelation. And so he's showing his servants, those who have given themselves to him, what is about to take place or come to pass. Those were both trying to come out at the same time. Quickly. The word is tachos, and that's where we get the word tachometer. It means quick or sudden. It does not mean necessarily soon as in a short time from now. So when Jesus says stuff is going to happen quickly, he's not saying it's going to happen in the next few years or anything like that. This is, again, a preterist argument, and that it must mean soon. And because of this word, then it means it had to have been fulfilled before AD 70, and it didn't. I mean, when you read through this, you can clearly see it wasn't. And so that's why people then paint themselves into the corner of having to allegorize everything, even when the context doesn't indicate that they should. So we have to pay attention to the meanings of those words, or we get off on the wrong foot at the right at the start. I also want to look at this word messenger, because it's going to occur all over the place. It is all over the New Testament. It's the word angelos, from which we get the transliterated word angel, and it means messenger. Anyone who delivers a message, any lexicon will tell you that, and they'll say that in the New Testament it tends to be used also for what they call divine beings, not meaning God beings, but spiritual beings, not humans. And I use that term a lot. I use messenger in my translation, but a lot of times I'll refer to them as angels just because everybody knows what I'm talking about. But the meaning is just messenger. And that's going to be an issue as we go along to the letters to the churches, because they're written to, Jesus will say, write to the angel of the church of Ephesus or something like that. While he's saying write to the messenger. And in my opinion, a lot of other opinions, the most likely meaning is that John was going to send out envoys or representatives or messengers to each of the churches, because all 7 of them were to get a copy of this entire revelation. So they needed messengers. They weren't, the whole church wasn't coming over to pick these up, and he obviously couldn't leave. So I'm going to, try to be careful on whether the context will tell us whether these are humans or not. And in some cases, like the letters to the churches, it really doesn't say, but if you think things through, there's never any place in the New Testament that says that there is an angel in charge of each gathering of Christians, because even Jesus said, where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there I am. And so, not to say that there aren't any angels present, but that there are no single angel representing each gathering. So I think it's more likely that these were human messengers. And as was revealed to John, who testified. Here's another word that people stumble over sometimes. The word marturio, and it means either a witness or a testimony. A testimony is what a witness gives. If you think in terms of a court of law, if you have a witness to a crime, they will give their testimony. And both of these words are from what has become in English to also mean one who dies for their testimony, a martyr. That's where that word comes from. That's a transliteration from the Greek. But in this document, and again, you have to look at each context, right here is talking about a witness, because John, of all the 12 original disciples of Jesus, was the only one not put to death. He died of old age. So this is something that he witnessed, and so John is the he who is being spoken of, John who testified to the word of God and the martyrdom of Jesus. Now there's that word again, and I'm like, well, Jesus died, so Jesus is the one we witness about, so I took the meaning martyr in that case, because that seems to be what fits in the sentence here. Now this one about blessing the reader and the hearer of the words of the prophecies, most people were illiterate in that time, and so there was maybe 1 or 2 people in each congregation who could actually read. And so these are the people, they may even be the messengers, who would read this letter aloud to the entire church. So this blessing is for that reader. Of course, it would probably extend to any other reader in the future, but the primary meaning is to the people who were reading to the others because they couldn't read. And they are the hearers. Here again, the time is near. This could be combined, some will take it to combine with tachos to mean, see, tachos doesn't mean quickly, it means soon in time. But nearness in Bible prophecy can be 1,000 years. We see that in hindsight. We also see that in the second letter of Peter, who wrote that with God, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. So then the question is, well, is he saying near in human terms or near in God's terms? And it's not said. So there is room for speculation. But it seems to me that the idea is what is called imminence. That means to say what Jesus was saying when he said, always be ready because you don't know the time. So the time is near means that you should always be ready for this. So that's who the letter is from and who it was dictated to. And now John is saying, this is me sending this to the 7 congregations in Asia. Congregations is how I translated church. The Greek word is ekklesia, and it simply means a gathering. I think I mentioned before that this same word is even used of an angry pagan mob who was going to try to put to death Paul and his traveling companion, and for hurting their idol business, the idol of the goddess Diana, I believe it was. And I think it was the Ephesians who were doing this, but if memory serves. At any rate, that was a generic term in the time in Greek for any kind of gathering of people. It was also an equivalent word for in Hebrew is synagogue. That's what a synagogue was. It was also a building, but it meant the gathering or church, if you will, of Israelites. And so when Jesus used that word in the Gospels, he's talking about them. The only time he didn't talk about the Jews as a church was when he said, I will build my church, not Israel, but my church. So you got to, that's one of those things you have to be careful of when you're reading the New Testament, especially if you're looking at the prophecy passages such as Matthew 24 that I took a really brief look at before. At any rate, there's that word. And then Asia, as I showed you on that other page, that's really Turkey. He's wishing them the usual greetings. And this phrase we'll see over and over again. The grace and peace to you from, grace is favor, from the greater to the lesser, and peace to you from the one who is, who was, and is coming, or will be. This is speaking to the eternity of God. So he was before, he is now, and he will always be. So that's a phrase referring to God. And this phrase, the 7 spirits are before his throne, some people take it to mean the 7-fold spirit, the 7 faceted spirit. All we know is that from the Greek, it says 7 spirits. What that means, it is not explained. So we'd just be speculating. At any rate, there is, and throughout the New Testament, only one Spirit of God, even in the Old Testament, one Spirit of God ever mentioned. So this is something that is unique and is, as described here, before his throne. Okay, so whatever meaning you want to assign to that, this is just identifying the source of the revelation. Verse 5, it's not just from the one on the throne, but also anointed, or Christ, or Messiah Jesus, the trustworthy martyr and firstborn from among the dead, ruler of the kings of the earth, who loves us and freed us from our failure. Failure, as I'll just briefly mention in my translation, most Bibles will just say sin for one of like 7 different words in the Greek. And so I tried to use a different word in English for each different Greek word, even though most of the time the words had blended in meaning, and they mostly had to do with the cause of the sin than whether or not it was sin. So it's all sin. At any rate, he's identifying this Jesus as the one who freed us from our sins by his blood, by his shed blood. And I'm going to skip here a little. I only skip one verse at a time on my little next button. So we did 5 verses, so I'm going to go to verse 6. And praise to God here. And here's an interesting statement that echoes one in Enoch that I think it was Jude mentioned. He is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him. Those who pierced him, being the Jews, and all the tribes of the earth will grieve. And what that phrase, yes, absolutely, is amen. That's people get all bent about the word amen. And amen in Greek, and it just means so be it. Most truly, putting a stamp of authenticity on something that was just said. That doesn't mean anything else. It's not Amen Ra or anything like that. This is Greek, not Egyptian. And people like to make word associations, but they really need to study up on etymology, which is the history of transmission of words, before they say those things. But anyway, this doesn't say exactly at what point this is happening. It's just saying this is the Jesus we're talking about is the one who's coming with the clouds. Early in the book of Acts, when after Jesus had been crucified and rose from the dead, he took up his inner circle of three, Peter, James, and John, up to the mountain, and then he was taken up to heaven while they watched, and a cloud hid him from their sight, and they're standing there gawking at the sky, and an angel comes down and says, "Hey, what are you doing here gawking at the sky? The same Jesus will come again as you saw him leave." Well, how did they see him leave? He was taken up in the sky and was hidden by a cloud. So the clouds and Jesus in the sky is a sign that he will come back someday in the way he left. He calls himself, this is Jesus, calling himself the Alpha and Omega, the God who was, who is, and is coming, the Almighty. Okay, so here we have Jesus calling himself by the same terms that the one on the throne calls himself. So, just something to pay attention to regarding the argument that Jesus didn't ever claim to be God. Here he is pretty much claiming that pretty clearly. Now, verse 9, John says, "I, John, your brother, and joint partner in the oppression," which, let me stop there and say, this is where the word tribulation comes from. And you got to remember that this is a generic term too, like ecclesia. It just meant trouble. So even though this is about a period of time that has come to be called the tribulation, don't think that every instance of that word means the tribulation. Sometimes it's used generically. So at any rate, the tribulation or trouble or oppression that John is talking about here is the common suffering that all the churches were going through at that time. Because he has participated in it, and clearly none of this stuff had happened yet. So he can't be talking about that tribulation. Okay? The kingdom, endurance with Jesus, and he was on the island called Patmos on account of the word of God and testimony of Jesus. So he's telling where he is and why. He was exiled. He doesn't say it's Domitian, the Roman emperor, but through historical documents outside of the Bible, we know this. And he says he was in the spirit on the Master's Day. People argue about what that means, but to me it just means the first day of the week, because that's what the disciples were in the habit of doing. They were in the habit of meeting on the first day of the week, not because they were trying to call it the Sabbath. They were not. But because they were honoring the day of the week that Jesus rose from the dead. That's all. It's the Catholic Church who tried to appropriate the Sabbath, but that's not what the Bible does, and not what the early church did. So he was exiled just for being a Christian, and he was in the spirit, whatever that means, and he heard behind him a loud voice as from a trumpet. We'll see lots of trumpets in this book. So he was he hears this voice. Now we're going to go find out what the voice said. Let me go to verse 11. Yeah, and I'm just glancing at a few questions Vic has, Larry, if you can just, remind me of those when I get to a break. I at least want to get through chapter 1, because 2 and 3 will be about the 7 churches, so that will be a good breaking point. Okay, verse 11, he heard this trumpet-like voice say, "Write down on a scroll what you see and send it to the 7 congregations, Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea." So he's going to tell him to write what he's going to see. Okay, that's it. That's all. Not make a commentary. Just write what you see. And he turns around to see the voice that was talking to him, and he says he saw 7 golden lampstands. There's 7 again. And standing in the center of them was someone human-like. That's the best I could render the Greek there. Clothed in a full-length garment with a golden sash around his chest. His head and hair were as white as wool or snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like burnished copper that has been fired in a furnace, and his voice sounded like the rushing of great amounts of water. Some people read this and try to say, this is what Jesus really looked like. He had white hair, his eyes were like this, his feet were like that. This is the glorified Jesus up in heaven, not in his normal human form. He says he's human-like, he describes him, but obviously there are key differences that were not present in his risen form when he was still on the earth, because there were people who saw him and didn't recognize him. They knew he was a human. They thought he was an ordinary human, but they didn't know exactly who he was. He was different. But if they had seen this, they would have really freaked out. They wouldn't have mistaken him for a gardener, for example. So I just wanted to point that out. This is where people get the idea of Jesus having white hair and all that. So let's go to verse 16. And any day now, this is going to load. There it goes. In his right hand, he held 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp, double-edged broadsword. Just briefly, a broadsword was given to, typically in the Roman army, the biggest, strongest guy in the army. And what his job was, and the reason the sword was double-sided, was he was the front man, the point man, who would go out in front of the army and start slashing left and right to open up a space for the other soldiers to run into and start fighting. So that's why his sword was double-edged. He would swing back and forth and cut in each direction. And so that's the kind of sword that is being described here coming from Jesus. His appearance was like the sun shining in all its brilliance. And John says, when I saw him, I dropped at his feet as if I were dead, but he placed his right hand on me and said, do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. That's another term for God on the throne. So he's equating himself with the Father once again here. The living one who died, but look, I am alive forever, and I hold the keys of death and Hades. That word Hades is right here, and it means the unseen, the place that is not seen, the grave. This is typically translated, especially in the King James, as hell, but there are a bunch of different words for places of the dead, such as Tartarus for the fallen angels. So this was the place of the unrighteous dead. Okay, so he has the keys, and this is clearly Jesus as the one who died but lives again. So he says, write down what you have seen, what you're seeing now, and what is about to take place after that. So we've got the past. So far he's seen, and John has dutifully written down what he's seen with him, hearing the voice of the trumpet and describing Jesus and all that. He's written that down. Then he's going to write down things that are happening at present, and then things that will happen after that. So he's setting the stage here. And the first thing he does is explain the symbolism. Now, when somebody explains the symbolism, and sometimes here it's Jesus, sometimes it will be an angel, we can't re-symbolize the answer. In other words, if we say, he's going to say the secret meaning of the 7 stars in my right hand and 7 golden lampstands is this. The 7 stars are the messengers of the congregations, or the angels of the churches, however you want to take that, while the 7 lampstands are the congregations themselves. So we cannot reinterpret the word church, congregation, or any of that, or, and say it means something else, or it must be an allegory, because Jesus is explaining, here's the secret, and here's what it means. And our word secret is mysterion. It's often mistranslated or transliterated mystery. The difference being between a secret and a mystery is a riddle to solve, while a secret is something that is clear but hidden from view. So this is a secret being revealed. And once again, revelation, to reveal. I forgot, I don't want to take the time to go back to the first page, the first verse, but it says the revelation of Jesus Christ. It is the word apocalypsis. That's where we get our transliterated word apocalypse. It does not mean simply disaster. What it meant directly there was to reveal, which is where we get our English word revelation. It means to reveal something that had been hidden before, or to unseal that which had been sealed shut. As I mentioned briefly the other day in my previous hangout, Daniel, the prophet of that, the prophecy that Revelation is very closely tied to, was told to seal up the prophecy because it involved the distant future. This one, where John is being told not to seal it. Okay, this is a revelation, not a sealing. And so he's saying that these things that John had seen were symbols of something else, and the symbols they were pointing, what the symbols meant were real things, congregations and their messengers. Okay, now let's go on next here. I don't remember if we're going into chapter 2 yet or not, but we will. Was that 20? Yeah, I want to go to 21. If there is a 21, and if they're not, we'll find out. Yep, it's 2:1. So I'm going to stop here just to take a couple of questions, and then I'll just continue on with the letters to the 7 churches. Okay, so I don't know. I can just read those, but if you want, Larry, you can unmute for a minute, and in case I missed something here.
Oh, okay. I was just starting to get ready to type. I'll just go ahead and read them to you. They're on the left page. Just a couple things out there. Vic is typing a few things. Tribulation, different from God's wrath. I'm guessing that's a question mark. And the next one to follow, time of Jacob's trouble, the tribulation, God's wrath. Your take, Paula.
Alrighty. Yeah, I said a little bit about that, or tribulation or trouble or oppression. The word actually more accurately means pressure. And it's a generic term meaning trouble. It's also the term generally used not by the Bible but by theologians to mean the 7 years that Revelation is talking about and Daniel is talking about. And there's also something called the Great Tribulation, which is the handy term used to refer to the last half of the tribulation because it's split into 2 sections of 3.5 years. And that's that Great Tribulation, which is believed to describe the time of Jacob's trouble, especially the second half. It doesn't mean the tribulation, that the whole tribulation isn't 7 years. It just means the second half is especially bad. That's my opinion on tribulation. The wrath of God is a big deal, and I will get into, I see your other question there about the rapture. I will get into that in a little bit when I show the commentary. And what that's about is that the wrath of God is really the key to understanding the different prophecy views that I mentioned the other day, that there were at least four different views of when the rapture happens: pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib, and pre-wrath. Technically, and I think I did a video on this about the rapture, and I explained that all of them are pre-wrath, technically, when you think about it, because nobody can dispute the fact that the church is not to be here when the wrath of God is here. Everything that we've suffered up to this point has been the wrath of man or the wrath of Satan. But there is a time coming for the wrath of God that has not come yet, and we're not to be on the earth when that happens. Nobody disagrees with that who has studied prophecy at all, no matter which of the tribulation timing views they hold to. So the question then is, what is the wrath of God? When does it start? And some people think it doesn't start till after the tribulation is pretty much over. They think that the final judgments all happen in a day. That's the pre-wrath view. And The post-trib view is very similar to that. I'm not going to nitpick about that right now. Mid-trib thinks that the wrath of God starts with the trumpet judgments. So everybody has to decide for themselves. My take is that the wrath of God begins with the very first seal, and we'll get into that. That's not till chapter 6, but like I said, I want to at least cover chapters 2 and 3 with the letters. And depending on how long it goes, the first hangout went about an hour and a half, and I don't want to go over 2 hours. So if I get through the letters in less time than that, then I'll go ahead and start on chapters 4, maybe 5, because chapter 6 would be a good place for another hangout to start. So if I can just put off there's more rapture talk coming is what I'll say, Vic. And so hopefully that's good enough for now. If there's nothing else, I will just keep going here and try to get through these so we can cover more material tonight. Anybody else got a question? Relevant question, I better say that. Alrighty. All right, chapter 2. The first letter is to the congregation in Ephesus. Now, we could read through this, but what I want to do right now, let me get rid of that one and skip over to an article I did on the 7 churches here. We're back to this, where this map was. And because I made a handy list here. This is actually several years after I did this translation and commentary. So I had a little more information. So I'm going to use this one right now. These are the names of the 7 churches. And Ephesus, for each one of these, there's, well, not all of them, but most of them have something positive that Jesus says first and something negative that he says to them. There are some churches don't have anything negative said to them, and one has nothing positive said to it. So I put a little plus or minus by the positive and negative for each one. And for Ephesus, which incidentally is the place where Paul wrote to when he wrote the letter of the Ephesians, the book of Ephesians in the New Testament. This is that church. The positive attribute was that they were discerning. They were very keen on telling true from false. Their negative attribute was they had lost their first love. And maybe I should switch back and forth and explain as I go along instead of doing this first and going back. Jesus always introduces himself in a different way to each of these churches too, which undoubtedly has significance for them. And after I'm done with the 7 churches, remind me, I want to go back and say how people take these 7 churches, what do they mean? I'm just going to go through what the text says for now, and then we'll go back and talk about interpretations of that. Congregation at Ephesus, write this. These are the words of the one firmly grasping the 7 stars in his right hand, the one walking among the 7 golden lampstands. So this is how he's identifying himself, and try to remember with each church we go over, it's going to be a little different. So he's telling them something in the way he introduces himself. And he says, I have seen what you've been doing, your hard labor and endurance, and that you don't put up with the depraved. You tested their claims to be ambassadors, which is the word apostolos, which is normally transliterated instead of translated apostle. These are people we today might call missionaries because they're sent out. That's what an apostle means. It's one who is sent out. When we use the word apostles in the New Testament, typically we're talking about a particular set of sent out people, and the difference being who sent them directly. These apostles in the New Testament are typically those who were sent directly by Jesus. Other apostles could be called that who were sent out as like a second generation and so forth. So anyway, I call them ambassadors because that seems to be a more descriptive term for the Greek word. Its meaning rather than its transliteration. So there have been false apostles coming to these people, and they were examined by the Ephesians and found to be liars. Okay, they found the claims to be false. And Jesus says, you have endured and upheld my name tirelessly. But, yeah, it's the word but. Sorry, Larry. It's not the word however. You could take it that way. But But it is a contrast. He's not negating what happened before, what he said before, but he's making a contrast. And that's what the word in Greek means. We were doing a contrast. Okay, so take it that way. But I have this against you. You have let go of the devotion you had at first. You have lost your first love. Remember the height from which you have fallen and change your mind. That change your mind is metanoeo, however you pronounce that in Greek, and it says to change your mind. It's the word typically translated repent. He's telling them that's all repent means. Turn around, go the other way, the opposite way. I mentioned that before. It means to change your mind, go the opposite direction. And so he's telling them they have kind of lost their fire, their zeal that they had at first, that all newbies seem to have. And they've kind of cooled off. And he's saying, you need to pick that back up again. You're getting complacent. And remember the height, remember how things used to be, and change your mind. Do the things you once did, because if you don't, I will come to you and remove your lampstand from its place. Jesus takes these things seriously. The churches are here for a purpose, and that purpose is to represent him. And if they're not representing him, then what good are they? As he himself said before he was crucified, what good is salt that has lost its flavor? And that's what we're supposed to be. So he's warning them. He first said what's good about them. Now he's saying there's a problem and they need to take care of this. So he's and the way he addresses the problem is specific to them and has a specific penalty. Okay, now we need to go to verse 6. Let's make this right up here. I'll just type that in, save me a few seconds. And then he goes positive again. But at least you have this going for you. You despise what the Nicolaitans do just as much as I. Lots of controversy about who these people were. It literally means people conquerors, people who subjugate others. That's what it means. Some people say there were a group of people who followed someone named Nicholas, who was teaching people to be immoral. That's what this is referring to. But this creates a redundancy, because later on we're going to see both this group and another group called the Balaamites, who are absolutely have to do with immorality. But so that would be redundant to list them both. So there's a difference in meaning, and I believe it does mean conquerors of the people, and I'm not the only one who believes that. I think I've mentioned the historian Philip Schaff, very well-regarded church historian, and he wrote that there were people before Constantine even. Constantine was in the 300s AD, and before that, after the apostles died, and just as they predicted, there were people rising up who wanted to be in charge and set up a hierarchy. Okay? And he's telling them, telling these people at Ephesus that, at least to their credit, they have identified these control freaks and stood against them. And Jesus despises this. And that's something everybody needs to remember about churches with hierarchies. This is something Jesus really hates. He doesn't just tolerate it. He doesn't look the other way. He doesn't think, I wish they wouldn't do that. He's like, I hate this. And then, as he will all say to, I think, all the churches, let those with ears pay attention to what the Spirit is saying to the congregations. And that, if you've got ears, listen, is just another one of those expressions. And he says, to those who conquer what? The word is also translated overcome. Let me look for that down here. To subjugate, to conquer or defeat. People who don't believe in the pre-trib rapture, and as I said, I've mentioned that a little bit before, I'll mention it again, believe that this means they must overcome in order to be saved and go to heaven, but that's not what this is saying at all. Jesus is talking about conquering the faults of this particular congregation that he just mentioned. He's given them a task to do, something to fix, and so those who do fix it, he's giving a promise of a blessing. I will give food from the tree of life. This isn't to say that nobody else gets that food. He's just wording the blessings in different ways, just as he's wording his introduction in different ways for each of these churches. He will give food from the tree of life, which is in the middle of the paradise of God. I'm not going to speculate on that right now. Now, before I go look, the next church is Smyrna. Let me go back to, whoops, not that one. This one. I get my tabs mixed up. Smyrna, the good point is they were strong and fearless in persecution. He's not going to say anything bad to them. Highlight that so I remember where it was. So he says, introduces himself as saying, these are the words of the first and the last who died and then lives again. I have seen the pressure you've been under, and there's that word pressure again, same word as tribulation, and no, it wasn't the tribulation. He said, you've been under a lot of pressure. You've been persecuted. Okay, and I've seen your poverty, yet you are rich. And the slander of those who claim to be Judeans but are not. They are a congregation of the adversary. I know I word this a lot differently than you usually see, and I'm not trying to hide anything. I'm trying to just translate the Greek here, and other terms may be more familiar, whatever you prefer. Most people, or most translations would word it, the slander of those who claim to be Jews but are not. They are a church or synagogue, actually. It says synagogue here, of the adversary. Adversary is where we get the word Satan. Satanas is adversary. It means accuser. That is your opponent in the courtroom. Okay, that's what this word means. So he's saying that these people are poor and oppressed and slandered by fake Jews. I've said this before. I know not everybody agrees with me, but it simply meant the area that used to be occupied by the original tribe of Judea, and in time when all the Jews came back there, a remnant of them, a remnant being a small percentage that came back from exile, that area was called Judea. It didn't mean the tribe of Judah by that point. It meant the area formerly owned by the tribe of Judea, or occupied, I should say, and that's the people there were called Judeans, and that's what the word is used throughout the New Testament. It is Judeans. The word Jew is I guess a shortened form of it, I guess you could say, but that's what that's the origination of it. So there are fake Judeans. Speculation on who that means, because he doesn't define it for us here. In those days, it was fairly easy to understand the direct meaning. The first primary meaning of the writing here is a letter to a church, a real church that really existed and had these real problems. And there were Jews in that day still. Even though Jerusalem had fallen, Judaism didn't just disappear. There's always a remnant. Okay, they were scattered. And they were still Jews, even though scattered. They kept that name. At any rate, there are some who pretended to be Jews but were not. Some people interpret them as false Christians, but that's a pretty hard thing to sustain looking at the Greek. These are false Jews. And what exactly they were doing, anybody could say. You'd have to try to research that. But at any rate, there are fakes, and he's saying that these are the people slandering them. And he says, but do not fear what you are about to experience. In other words, more trouble is coming to you. Don't be afraid of it. And he's saying, look, the false accuser, and let me look at that word, diabolos. Sounds familiar, right? It's the word where we get the word devil. It means a false accuser, someone who slanders. Okay? This is another name for the same entity. The first is his habit of standing in a courtroom as our prosecuting attorney, and the other describes him as the one who's spreading the lies and bringing false testimony against us. So this false accuser, the devil or Satan, will throw you into prison to test you, and you will be under pressure for 10 days. Nobody knows exactly what that means. Some try to force fit it into history, future from the time of this writing, and they try to find 10 periods of persecution or 10 emperors that persecuted or something. I think that's kind of a stretch, although in some respects, as I'll get to when I'm done with all the churches here, It could. I do think there is something about these 7 letters that indicate the church age, but what the 10 days means, nobody is quite sure. But I'm sure they, well, I can't say I'm sure, but I would presume that there was a period of 10 somethings that happened to these people that were particularly bad. And one thing we can all agree on is that in the first century, the Christians were heavily persecuted. First of all, they were in the book of Acts, we can see that they were being persecuted by the Jews, and the Apostle Paul, who was called Saul at that time, was one of them. But then the persecution, as Christianity spread, came from Rome, and it was very, very severe. And we all know about the phrase throwing Christians to the lions. That's where that came from. So he's saying, do not fear this. This is going to happen. The devil will throw you into prison to test you, and you'll be under pressure for 10 days. Be faithful even to the point of death, and I will award you the gift of life. So he's not mincing any words. He's not giving them false hope, but he is saying, stay with it. Be faithful. Don't worry about what, it's easy to say don't worry about it, but he's saying don't be afraid of it. Face it, go through it, and you will get your reward. Okay, now let's move on to verse 11. Let those with ears pay attention to what the Spirit is saying to the congregations. Those who conquer what? Well, these people are going through, they don't have faults to fix, but they are going through to be severely tested. And those who conquer and make it through all right without losing, without denouncing Jesus or anything, will absolutely not be harmed by the second death. The second death is a euphemism meaning eternal separation of the soul from God. And I'm not going to pursue that any further right here. So now we're going to go on to the next one is Pergamos. So let me jump back over here. Pergamos, their good points are that they have been faithful though tempted. Their bad points, it seems like a contradiction, but we'll look at the details here. They tolerated immorality, okay? So that's what he's going to fault them for. These are the words of the one having the sharp double-edged broadsword. This is not how he described himself to the other churches so far. And remember what the purpose of a broadsword is. So he's going to get in their face about something. So this is serious business. And then he says, I've seen where you live. And this is really interesting. Where the adversary's throne is. But you hold tightly to my name and have not renounced my faith, even in the days when my faithful martyr Antipas was killed among you, where adversary lives. I've written elsewhere about, I think in my prophecy book, that there was that historical section, and this time it wasn't Philip Schaff, it was, I believe, Harry Ironside, who explained the Babylonian religion's roots, and that when they were chased out of ancient Babylon, they eventually wound up in Pergamos. That wasn't their last stop, but it was one of them. And so Jesus is saying here, this is where the adversary's throne is. So the Babylonian religion there in Pergamos is where Satan's throne was at that time. So Satan's throne is associated with Babylonian religion. And they were right there with it, okay? And even though one of them had been martyred, they didn't renounce their faith. They didn't let that example of being martyred scare them, okay? But there's a problem. I have a few things against you, Jesus says, that you have some people there. In other words, not all of them. So this is why there's not a contradiction here. They've been faithful in the face of persecution, but they have some people there who are holding tightly to the teaching of Balaam. This is the other that I mentioned when we first encountered the Nicolaitans and why they're different and why the Nicolaitans are not the ones teaching immorality. This is referring to an Old Testament character named Balaam. This is the famous guy whose donkey spoke to him, okay? Just briefly on that story, the language indicates that the donkey was essentially operated like a puppet. In other words, the donkey did not originate the speech, but it was the angel spoke through the donkey, okay? That's what that's about. That's who this guy is. And Balak is the king who kept trying to get Balaam to curse the Israelites so they could be defeated in battle, and he kept refusing to do it. But he found a tricky way to get the people of Israelites to curse themselves. And so what he did was to set a trap, as it says here, for the people of Israel and entice them to eat food sacrificed to idols and to practice promiscuity. So this was being tolerated by some people there in that congregation. And here's where it would have been a redundancy. It says, and likewise, you have some who have adopted and hold tightly to the teaching of the Nicolaitans. So not only do they have the issue of people teaching loose morals, there are also people there teaching hierarchy. So those are two things that Jesus has against them, even though they live right there where Satan's throne is. So let's go down to verse 16. Come on, wake up. Here we go. Change your minds, repent, then. Otherwise, I will suddenly, there's that word suddenly again, tachos. Otherwise, I will suddenly come to you and battle with them with the broadsword from my mouth. So there's where that broadsword comes in. He's going to lay waste to the people who are tolerating these evil things. Once again, he says, let those with ears pay attention to what the Spirit is saying to the congregation. So those who conquer what? Look back at what was just said. I will give the hidden manna, manna being the supernatural food that was dropped from the sky, literally, when the people of Israel were wandering in the desert for 40 years. And he will give them hidden manna, also a white pebble with a new name written on it, which no one knows but the one holding it. The white pebble in that time and culture signified a verdict of not guilty. If you were guilty of something, you got the black pebbles. So the white one was purity and innocence. And so he will wipe them clean, wipe away their sins if they conquer these faults. Okay, now we're going to go on to Thyatira. We go back here. Strong point is that they were facing a lot of struggles. Bad point is that they were accepting some false teachings. Okay, now we go back here and see, these are the words of the God-man. That's how I translated the Son of God. Son of, in Hebrew thinking, was a member of a classification. Basically, a son of Israel was an Israelite citizen. Son of God is a God class person. Okay, so I called him the God-man because this is Jesus who was both God and man. The one whose eyes are like blazing fire and whose feet are like burnished copper, which we remember from chapter 1. So this is how he's describing himself as not an ordinary guy that they should take lightly. I think that's the message being conveyed between the lines here, is he's saying, you know, to these people in Thyatira, remember who you're talking to here, okay? And he says, here's the good points first. I've seen what you've been doing, your love and faith and service, your endurance, and that you are doing more now than you were at first. So they've made some progress. But I have this against you. Excuse me. I have this against you. You let that woman Jezebel go around saying she's a prophet, teaching and misleading my slaves. There's that word slave again. Remember what that means. To practice promiscuity and to eat food sacrificed to idols. It seemed to be a common problem in that area among the churches there. The woman Jezebel is another reference to the Old Testament. She was the wife of the king Ahab, who was a very bad king as well. And he was a very pouty king who liked to sit around and mope about things. And she's like slapping him upside the head going, you're the king, don't you get it? You know, you can have whatever you want. And so she goes out and gets stuff for him. And the way she gets stuff is that she's was telling people that she was a prophet, and she taught them to be immoral and to eat food sacrificed to idols. This is what the Old Testament Jezebel did. I just make a brief mention that some people in the churches greatly misuse this term and think that there's actually an evil spirit called Jezebel that teaches women not to be subservient to men, and that's absolute hogwash, is the kindest way I can put it, and I'm not going to pursue that right now. That's a whole book I've written. So at any rate, this woman Jezebel was saying she was a prophet, teaching and misleading the people there. And after I get through these churches, 7 letters to churches. I'm going to jump to my commentary and flesh this out a little bit more about Jezebel and how what she was teaching was related to the worship of Apollo. Okay, so that's 220. Let's see if we've got a 21 or not. Yep. I gave her time to change her mind, but she won't give up her promiscuity. So look, I'm throwing her this look. The old King James would render that behold. It just means to look. Look emphatically. I am throwing her and her clients into a bed of great suffering if they don't turn back from her practices. So she's a goner, but he's warning anyone who's done business with her to back off, or they're going to share in her punishment. And that's what it means when Jesus says, I will strike her children dead so that all the congregations will know I am the one who searches minds and hearts. Everyone will get what's coming to them. So he's being really blunt and harsh with them because this is a very, very serious problem. Yet I say this to the rest in Thyatira who do not hold to this teaching, who have not known the so-called deep things of the adversary. I will not put any other weight on you except that you hold tight until I arrive. In other words, there's some people there who have managed to resist this, and all Jesus says is just hang on. He doesn't put any other burden on them. This is an interesting statement here, the deep things of Satan. Remember that's what adversary means. Let me go find it. There we are, Satan, adversary. The deep things of Satan. This is one of the ways to describe early Gnosticism. This teachings, the deep secrets of Satan, the Luciferian teachings. This is what the powers that be hold to, Luciferian teachings, and that's what's being referenced here. That these people have resisted even that, and so they're being commended. Those that have managed to escape what the rest of the people were doing. Now let's see if we got a verse 26 or not. Yeah. To the ones who conquer what? Remember what was just said, and guard my actions. Usually we see the word keep. Keep doesn't just mean to hold on to something. It means to guard it and protect it. And those who hold to those teachings and works or deeds or actions to the end, Jesus says he will give jurisdiction or authority over the non-Judeans. Non-Judeans is how I rendered the word ethnos, which is basically anybody who's not a Jew. Okay, they were referred to as the ethnos, the nations. And these are the people that of this congregation. Those who conquered would be put in authority over the Gentiles. Okay, that's another word that we commonly use. They will, and then this is in quotes because it's from the Old Testament, they will shepherd them with a rod of iron and crush them like earthenware jars, just as I too have received jurisdiction from my Father. So what Jesus is saying, I'm delegating some of my authority to you because of your conquest of these issues, and that you will rule with absolute authority during a certain time in the future. And there's another curious phrase, I will give them, the ones who conquer. I put that in brackets just to say who's he's talking about, and I looked around in the grammatical information here. The ones who conquer will be given the morning star. Astra is the name what we get from asteroid or astronomy. It's from this Greek word astra, which means star. That's all it means. Any bright little point in the sky was a star. Some were called wandering stars. The word planet means wanderer in Greek. The Greek word means. And so the planets were called the wandering stars. So just a little, things I thought would be interesting to people I hang around with. Anyway, the morning star, it's just saying the star in the early day, the star in the morning. That's the way the Greek expresses the morning star. People get hung up on the morning star as, is this Satan or is it Jesus? Well, it depends on the context. This is what I keep saying. Context is everything. Just because you see a word in two different contexts doesn't mean it refers to the same thing in every context. That's a fallacy, a linguistic fallacy. So what he's saying here is that he, Jesus, is the morning star in this context. He's the good one. Okay? That giving them the morning star, that's, I can't speculate very well on what he's meaning by giving, as if he's giving himself to them. What that means specifically or concretely, I'm not sure, and I'm not going to try to guess. At any rate, it's a really good reward. Let those with ears pay attention to what the Spirit is saying to the congregations. Now in 3:1, to the messenger of the congregation in Sardis. Okay? Sardis, nothing good. This church is dead. Okay? And he says, these are the words of the one having 7 spirits of God. Spirit is all about life, okay? And the 7 stars. I've seen what you've been doing with your reputation of being alive, but you are dead. Okay, so they got everybody fooled. They're thinking they're a viable church, and they're an absolute zombie corpse on their feet kind of church. They were fake to the core. Okay, now let's look for 3:2. Wake up and reinforce what little remains and is about to die, because I have not found your work fulfilled before my God. That's about as blunt as it gets. Remember then what you have received and heard. Guard it and change your minds. But if you don't stay alert, I will come like a thief without warning. So Jesus is going to come back, and it's going to be a total surprise to the spiritually almost dead. The congregation as a whole was dead. There were still some there, as there always are, people who aren't in the majority or aren't participating in whatever the fault is of the church. So he's saying, remember what you received and heard, guard it and change your minds. If you don't stay alert, I will come like a thief without warning. But you have a few people there in Sardis who have not contaminated their clothes. They will walk with me in white because they are worthy. Those who conquer this dead condition will likewise be clothed in white garments, and I will definitely not erase their names from the book of life, but I will acknowledge them before my Father and his messengers. His messengers, here we're clearly talking about angels, angelic beings. Let those with ears pay attention to what the Spirit is saying to the congregations. Okay, now let's move on to verse 7. Almost done with the 7 churches. Philadelphia. Escape from the global, forgive me for the use of that term, this was done a number of years ago. Escape from the global time of testing. This is a positive thing, nothing negative. That was the only one of the other one of the 2 churches about nothing, that Jesus had nothing bad to say. To the messenger of the church in Philadelphia write this. These are the words of the one who is holy and true, the one having the key of David that opens what no one can lock and locks what no one can open. I believe we made a brief reference to this yesterday in a conversation with Jibby. It was either, I think it must have been at Free Chant, but this is about opening and shutting doors. Okay? And we'll hear more about the door here in a second. I have seen what you've been doing, but look, I have set before you an open door that no one can shut, because you have little power, yet you guard my word and have not renounced my name. So these people are commended for hanging on. Jesus earlier told a few conquerors that he asked of them was to hang on, and that's all he's asking this entire congregation. You have an open door. Okay, so he introduced himself as the one who opens and shuts doors, and no one has anything to say about it, but he's saying, I have set before you an open door that no one can shut, because you've been faithful to my word and my name. People get upset about the Bible, and yet here people are being, I know you can say this is not the Bible. It doesn't say Bible here, but the word, and Jesus calls himself the word sometimes, but in here he's saying my word, the words that he says, and the Bible is from God, so there you go. You guard that and not renounced it or not renounced his name. And he says, look, I'm making those of the congregation of the adversary, that is to say, the church of Satan, who lie and say they are Judeans, but are not. These are the fake Jews again. Come and worship at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. So he's going to make their enemies bow before them, which is really, really, really humiliating. And this is a delicious payback for what they've been suffering. They've been dealing with these liars. And so Jesus is going to reward them in the most appropriate way, making their enemies bow before them and acknowledge that he has loved them. Since you guarded, now this is very interesting, and Vic, we're going to talk about the rapture here a little bit. Since you guarded the word of my endurance, I will also guard you out of the hour of trial that is about to come upon the whole inhabited world to test all who live on the earth. There's nothing ambiguous about that statement. It's talking about something that had never happened before. It involves the entire world, not a region. And it has the purpose of testing everyone who lives on the earth. You could call them earthlings. I was, thinking about translating that way, but I said, no, I don't want to get the, UFO business, mixed in here as a criticism. I don't want to push that hard. I would call them earth dwellers. Okay, earth dwellers isn't too bad. And you can see in the Greek down there, it says those dwelling on the earth. And this phrase is held by many theologians to mean people of the earth, people who are earth-like, people whose mind is on the physical base earthly things. Okay, so these are not the heavenly minded people. These are the earthly minded people. And he's saying two very important things here. He's keeping these people out of the hour of trial, that is the time of it, and the place, the whole inhabited world. They're not going to be put in a place of safety on the world. They're going to be taking it out of the entire inhabited world. And this is going to happen at the hour of trial, which is the tribulation. So Jesus is promising these people who have been faithful to him that this congregation that he is going to keep them out of both the time and the place of the wrath of God. Okay? That's a rapture reference. That's a departure reference. I mentioned that yesterday about departure. So he's going to keep them out of that. And remember that open door that he's been talking about here to this church? We're going to see that here again when he's done with the seventh and final church we'll talk about next. Remember that thing about the door. And he says, I am coming suddenly. There's that word tachos again. Not soon, but suddenly. I'm going to come all of a sudden when you're not expecting me. Hold tightly to what you have so that no one can take your reward. So just hang on. Here we have that again. Let me go to verse 12 here. Hold on a second. Those who conquer, this is to say, hang on, will be made pillars in the temple of my God. Don't, get all crazy with that. Whatever that means, he's describing them as the very foundations of the temple of God, and will never go outside of it again. And I will write on them the name of my God and the name of his city, the new Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from him, and my new name. Let those with ears pay attention to what the Spirit is saying to the congregations. Okay, so that's a really promising one for being faithful, is that they will escape the time of the wrath of God. Okay, we got one more to do here. Laodicea. Indifferent. This is another one with nothing good said about it. They're blasé. They're the church of meh. They don't care. They're lukewarm, as Jesus will call it. To the messenger of the congregation Laodicea, write this. These are the words of the true one, the trustworthy martyr, the originator of God's creation. I have seen what you've been doing. You are neither hot nor cold. If only you were one or the other. And so since you are tepid, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to vomit you out of my mouth. It doesn't get much more blunt than that. He's telling them that they can't make up their mind. They're fence sitters. Okay, and they don't go one way or the other, and they're not making any progress at all. So let's go to verse 17. You say, I am rich and have amassed wealth and need nothing. Does that sound familiar to a lot of churches today? I am rich and have amassed wealth and need nothing. But you cannot see that you are wretched, pitiful, destitute, blind, and naked. They're everything they think they're not. In other words, they're in denial. We could use that word as a quick description. I advise you to buy from me refined gold so that you can be truly rich, white clothes so your shameful nakedness will not be exposed, and eye salve to anoint your eyes so that you can see. Now listen to this. Those I am fond of, and there's the word phileo, which is the same word, base word of the word Philadelphia. Those I am fond of, I rebuke and instruct. So in other words, just because he's getting in their face doesn't mean he doesn't like them. It means he does like them. As he says, so be filled with desire and change your minds. He wants them to not be indifferent about things that are so very important. He says, look, I've been standing here knocking on the doors, which means he's not even in that church. They're not just dead. They threw him out. And he's saying, I'm standing here knocking on the doors. If anyone hears the sound and opens up the door, I will enter in and dine with them and they with me. To those who conquer, that is to say, opening the door, I will grant the right to sit with me on my throne, just as I conquered and sat with my Father on his throne. So he's going to delegate his blessings to them. Let's go to verse 22. Let those with ears pay attention to what the Spirit is saying to the congregation. So there we have the 7 churches. Let me take a quick look over here, make sure. I basically was saying, what I had, not word for word, what I had written here. And you can certainly, I think I did give this link. Yeah. Look over this if you want to go over those things again. Let me see. I think I had something in here about the different theories about that, but I might have only put that in the commentary. So we've finished those 7 letters, and I'm going to take a break and take questions after I look at the commentary just a bit on these 7 letters, and then I'll take some questions. I won't go through that part in the commentary. Let me skip through there. All right. Skipped a little too far. All right. I guess I did write that someplace else in my book. So I'll just say from off the top of my head here about the theories. One is, as I mentioned, that the 7 letters indicate 7 periods of church history, or 7 stages. Because it did start with persecution, and then it went on eventually to indifference and all these other things. You can make a loose fitting to church history so far. But the thing is that all 7 of these churches existed at once in the 1st century. There was no sequence of churches. These were all in existence at the same time. So I don't put a lot of weight on the 7 letters as a sequence of sections of church history. I don't do that. But I do believe this is about church history as a whole, and that these attributes could be true of any congregation throughout church history at any time, and that it tells us a lot of things about how Jesus takes things so seriously, and that there are rewards coming for those who are faithful. So I think that's all I'm going to say about that, and then I will take the questions, and then I think, let's see, we've been going for a little over like an hour and 20 minutes. I think I will try to do chapters 4 and 5 so that the next hangout can start with where the real judgments begin, because 4 and 5 is a setup of where John sees things in heaven. So I'm going to stop there and grab a quick drink of water while we open up for questions. Take it, Larry.
Oh, nothing like getting handed the 4.
Wake up!
Yeah, no, I'm here. I'm here. I'm here. Go ahead and take a break. And when you're back in your seat, I'll.
I'm sitting right here. I got my drink right here. I just need time to drink it.
Oh, Okay.
So go ahead.
There's actually a couple things.
I think there were quite a few scrolling by, so I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything,
Skylights. Well, it is a good question. What year we're in? Obviously, that's
Jimmy's messing with me, and I talked about that already in private. But yeah, nobody knows for sure the year. I said briefly that when the Jews saw that the Christians were using the Old Testament scriptures to prove that Jesus was the Messiah, they monkeyed with it, and they also monkeyed with a number of years, because that's one of the ways they tried to hide that Jesus fulfilled the prophecies. So there's probably at least a couple hundred years off of the real calendar. They say, I think today the Hebrew calendar will tell you it's the year 5,700 something or other. It's probably actually closer to 5,900 or thereabouts since creation. That's the number since creation. I believe the Chinese do something similar. They're in the year 5,000 something or other from what they believe is creation too. So that's interesting that the Chinese have a similar, at least in the ballpark, calendar of years from the beginning rather than from the time of Christ. So we're nearing 6,000 years as far as that goes. But when it comes to prophecy, we aren't given a specific year, other than a sequence is more accurate to say, a sequence and characteristics of the time to look for, rather than a specific year. So this is why, even as a pre-tribber, I strongly object to my fellow pre-tribbers who try to set dates. I try to interpret everything they see in the news as a fulfillment of prophecy. They call that newspaper eschatology. Eschatology being the study of prophecy. And newspaper eschatology is just picking out every news headline saying, this is it, and no, it's not. And then they get embarrassing people like Harold Camping, who said that he was coming in 2011. And then there was a guy who wrote a book called 88 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming in 1988. Of course, that didn't happen. Those people are embarrassments to us, and that's because they don't understand the scriptures, and they're not supposed to set dates like that.
Exactly. And if he was on his way, he would have sent me a letter or a memo or a sticky. I'd just make it a little fun.
There you go.
Victoria also had another one. It was she was curious of how Christians are continually persecuted, and God/Jesus taken out of schools, government, etc., and the Bible banned right after following. If these things are man-made, as some people think, why are others so much concerned about the Bible, God/Jesus?
Can you run some of that by me again? Maybe I can look at her questions. I'm not quite sure what.
It's up in chat a little bit.
Okay.
It's like a two-parter.
See, she says sun, moon, and stars for signs and seasons. That's right. Deceived position. Yeah. Well, maybe someday, Jimmy, I'll get to that stuff. Right now, I kind of got to stick to the Revelation because I want to get through it. Okay. Curious how Christians are continually persecuted and God, Jesus taken out of schools, government. Yeah, that's a correlation that I think we can at least give some causation to, that with a decline in ethics in general, we have seen, and especially taking the Christian God out of things have not improved as people had hoped. And the rabid atheists, I will call them, do not have their paradise yet, because these pesky Christians just don't go away. But they have taken them out of the schools, and the schools are absolute trash heaps now. So there you go. If these things are man-made, why are others so much concerned about them? Yeah, I think what she's saying, if I understand her right, is that if the Bible is a man-made book, why there's so much concern about it. I've often said that, I've quoted, there was someone who advised a king who was thinking about burning all the Bibles, that he said the Bible is an anvil that has worn out many hammers. You really don't see any other ancient text or religious writing get so hammered as the Bible has been for so long by so many people. So there must be something to it. And the fact that it survived is a testimony to, or a testament to, the providence of God, in my opinion. Others will say it will survive because Satan's doing it and he wants to keep it. Well, then he's doing it all wrong, because he's, killing people for having it, making sure that people, it's been more than once in history where Christians were put to death for having Bibles, and put to death by the most painful means. So, and some of these deaths were, of course, done by the Catholic Church against others, who dared to, such as Tyndale, way before the Reformation, who dared to put the Bible in the language of the common people. And so there's something about it, Satan doesn't seem to mind keeping it obscured, but he has no qualms about trying to wipe it out either. So there you go. That's just something to note. I hope I did justice to your question there. Planets and stars. The Bible calls them all stars. It says that some of them wander. So it doesn't make, the only distinction it makes between all the bright, shiny things in the sky besides the sun and moon is that some of them are stationary and some of them are not. The wandering ones are called the planets. That means what planet means, wanderer. So it doesn't say that they're not stars. It just says they're stars that move. Okay? I hope that's a clear distinction. Not talking about the P900 because I can't have one, so... well, I could, but that would be irresponsible.
Yeah, you also referenced something before, which you had said, which was a question, how people take the 7 churches. Maybe it's too early to ask or remind you with that question, or do you want to go ahead and maybe finish up and then take that?
Yeah, I think maybe I didn't finish. I started to talk about it, that I don't believe it's a sequence of church history. I think it's about church history in general, but not that the churches represent a sequence of 7 ages or epochs of the church age, or whatever you want to call it. I believe that since these churches all existed at the same time in the first century, that they probably indicate something about the church age at any given moment or any given congregation. That's pretty much all I have to say about it, but some do believe that it is a sequence, a roadmap of history in advance. You can take it that way, but as I said, there's a lot of little details as I went along about how Jesus introduces himself and how he says he's going to reward those who overcome or conquer. Probably meant a lot more to those churches than we understand today. But if we're supposed to know what they mean, we'll know. Okay, that's all I can say.
And there's one last that just popped up. I saw Victoria just pop one up and says, Paul, do you think the stars are heavenly beings?
That's more of a Book of Enoch thing, and I can't say that they're not. The Bible doesn't say what they are, but in the New Testament, it only says when Paul is introducing a topic of different kinds of bodies, when he actually was talking about the rapture and the rising of Christians from the dead. And because somebody, I think it was First Thessalonians, where the people asked what Paul considered a stupid question. They're saying, well, how will we be raised? What kind of body will we have? And Paul's like, you idiots. He pretty much says that in the Greek. When you plant the seed does not resemble in any way the thing that grows out of it. If you could, a bunch of seeds look very much alike, but you get very different plants out of them. And he's saying seeds have one kind of body, people have another kind of body, animals have another kind of body, and the stars have another kind of body. So take that however you want. But they could be. I can't rule it out. My personal opinion, either way, they could be conscious entities. I don't know. There's a lot of mythology and speculation, and even, like I said, some things in the Book of Enoch that would indicate that they are conscious beings and that they might be angelic beings. But the problem is that their purpose is to tell time. There is a calendar and a clock. Even the sun, moon, and stars in Genesis 1 will tell you that that's the purpose of them. And whether these would be what God used fallen angels for, partially, I don't know. But that's just speculation, and that's all I can say about it. She says, why is the moon referred to as her? This is a grammatical gender issue. As I think I mentioned before in the first hangout, in Hebrew, for example, a man's hand would be called she. because she is a feminine noun, and that's all. Why a hen is a feminine noun, who knows? It just is, and so it takes the feminine pronoun she. In the same way, the Holy Spirit takes the feminine pronoun she in Hebrew, but the neuter pronoun it in Greek. So it's not saying anything about biological gender of any sort, or it's also not saying that this is a person. Okay, and that's specific to Vic's question, because in many languages, such as French or things like that, for example, every noun has a grammatical gender. They might call a tractor she or he. It doesn't mean it's female or male or even a person. It's just that it has grammatical gender because tractor happens to be a feminine or masculine noun. And that's all. So I wouldn't put a lot of importance on that pronoun for the moon. Okay. How are we doing?
We're good. No, we're good. We're good. Go ahead. Take over. Carry on.
All right. It's been an hour and a half. If nobody objects or is too terribly awfully bored, I might go on to the chapter 4 and 5, and then start chapter 6 would start the actual wrath of God, in my opinion, starting the judgments themselves, and some really interesting stuff. So if that's okay with you guys, and if you're tired, I'll save this for next time. But if not, I can keep going.
I'm good. I'm good. Comfortable.
All righty.
Sitting back with my cigar and enjoying the conversation, and enjoying the presentation, I should say. I'm sure everybody else has the same way. I
just want to close a tab there just to hopefully save some resources. All right, chapter 4. I'm going to take a quick look at my commentary. I'm trying to decide whether to read through this. I might not. I might go with a commentary here just for a bit, and if we get into a snag, I'll go back to the actual text, because I want to try to hurry a little bit right now. Oh, I might do just the first part of it, because I said something about doors, remember? After these things, you're going to see this phrase over and over in Revelation, meta, after, depending on which part of speech it goes with, whether it means with, among, or after. In this case, it's after. After these things, meta, tauta, or tafta, if you use modern Greek, that phrase is used many times in Revelation, and it's a transition of sorts and a sequence, okay? That's the important things. The only question is whether it's a sequence of when John saw it or when it actually will happen in the future. That's the question. At any rate, John is saying after these things. What things? After his initial encounter with Jesus as the trumpet-like voice, after the letters dictated for the 7 churches, after all that, after these things I looked, and what did I see but a door opened in heaven? There's that door. And what did Jesus say about an open door? To which church? He said it to, I believe it was Philadelphia, where he said, you're going to be taken out of the time and place of the wrath of God. So we could take this as meaning that after the church age, the church will be taken up in this door open in heaven to escape the time and trouble. And escape is not a dirty word. Some people think it's cowardly to think of escape. That's why they hate the idea of the rapture, especially pre-trib. They want to suffer almost, it seems. That's crazy, but Jesus himself said in the Gospels, pray that you will be counted worthy to escape all these things. So escape is not a bad thing. Jesus himself recommends it. So that's a little context here on what John is saying, that after these things, we could take as the church age. You don't have to take it that way, but I kind of think it fits. I looked and saw the open door, then the trumpet-like voice. So we got an open door, an escape, going to heaven, and a trumpet. And that's all the conditions for the rapture. Then the trumpet-like voice I had heard before said to me, come up here, and I will show you what must come to pass after these things. That to me is a rapture verse, Vic. I think that's pretty clear. That isn't the only verse. I've got a collection of things for the pre-trib rapture. But here he's just presented the church age, and then he says, in reference to the one church that was told about an open door and escaping the wrath of God, he says, there was a door open in heaven. The trumpet voice says, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after these things." So not only we've got two afters here. After these things I looked, and what's going to happen after these things. So we can't say this is just what John saw next, although it is, but it's also what happens next. So here we have a confirmation that the judgments that and the things that is going to happen in the future. Remember, it started off saying what was, what is, and what is to come. Well, now we're about to do is to come, the future. Okay? So before this future starts, though, John, as representing the church, is taken up into heaven at the sound of a trumpet, and through this open door promised to those who were faithful. So there you go. Immediately I was in the Spirit, which is to say, probably that this was a spiritual journey, not an actual physical snatch up, and yet the symbolism seems pretty clear. The not necessarily symbolism, but the wording here, the example that we're given in this context. And he says, "I was in the Spirit, and look, a throne set in heaven." So he finds he's taken up to heaven, and he sees the throne of God. And on the throne, he says, sits someone whose appearance is like the precious stones jasper and carnelian. Surrounding the throne is a rainbow like an emerald. Okay, the bow word is over here, iris, where we get the word iris, like the iris of your eye. And we think of rainbows as like a half circle, but there are some rare full circle ones. And when we think of, if I can make draw an analogy here to an iris of an eye, it's a complete circle. So there's a circle around the throne of God, and it is green like an emerald. And around that throne are 24 thrones with 24 elders sitting on them, with the elders clothed in white garments and wearing golden victors' crowns on their heads. Okay, the word elders was where we get the word Presbyterian. It's presbyteros, and it literally means older people or those recognized as mature. Okay, and this is used to describe leaders of churches, not bosses of churches, but leaders, and there's a difference, of people who look over, actually that's another church denomination, is a similar word called Episcopal church, is from a Greek word meaning to oversee. And again, it's not a term of authority, it's a term of responsibility, where you look over and guard the perimeter of something. And so these are elders sitting on thrones, 24 of them, all around the throne of God. Why 24? Well, it's double the number 12. And it seems to indicate, and we'll see this at the very end of Revelation, where there are 12 foundations to the New Jerusalem and 12 gates. And the gates have the names, if I've got this right, the gates have the names of the tribes of Israel, while the foundations have the names of the 12 apostles, of the foundation of the church. And so this 212s here could indicate that this is a group of people representing a melding of those two groups. That is to say, Israel or the Jews and Gentiles. And that's exactly what the church is. It's a melding into a new creation, Paul calls it, that is neither Jew nor Gentile, but the church of God. And so these 24 elders could indicate the church of God surrounding the throne. And we know that these are not angels because it describes them, first of all, as elders. No angel, no angelic being is ever called an elder. They are clothed in white garments, which symbolizes purity, but they wear golden victors' crowns on their heads. There's two types of crowns words in Greek. One is this one, which is called Stephanos, which the word Stephen means, and it means crown. And it's a particular kind of crown. Let me find it here in the Greek. Garments white, heads of them awards. It means to be awarded. It's the wreath that Greek athletes would put on their heads when they won something was called a Stephanos. So it is a crown of a victor. And This is what Jesus talked about to all 7 churches. He talked about those who overcome, those who are victorious, those who conquer. That's the kind of crown you give a conqueror. That's the kind of crown these elders are wearing. The other kind of crown is called a diadem, and it's the crown of royalty. Okay, so this victor's crown, worn by people who are called elders and 24 in number, is pretty strong, in my opinion, indication of the church being in heaven before any of the judgments start. So this to me is another support for the pre-trib rapture. That is to say, before any of the judgments begin at all, which is why I believe the wrath of God begins with the first seal judgment. Just my opinion. There you go. So let's go on to verse 5, chapter 4. And he's describing further. I'm going to go back now to the commentary for this. And I described a little bit about that already, about after these sayings and how it relates to the rapture or departure. And you can see the previous hangout for a distinguishing between, the meaning of those two words. They both mean the same thing. This is, the word meant departure. And that's what John just did. He departed the earth and went to heaven. It's also, there's other words by Paul used, such as snatched up or caught up, is where we get the word rapture. And I give the references here. And I don't know if I gave the link to my commentary. Let me put that in the chat. There we go. And the timing I already went over. Here's let me add a little bit here to that. The pre-trib view. I'll go over this since it seems to be a warrant emphasis. That no specific signs or conditions are required to signal to the departure. It is possible that God does not want Satan to know when the departure will happen, which would explain why Satan seems to keep trying to have a worldwide government ready at all times, and why I've told people I believe there's always an Antichrist candidate waiting in the wings, and why there are so many false prophecies about the end of the world, because nobody knows when it will be, and Satan keeps trying to guess, and so he may be telling some people. I'm not trying to say that everybody who sets dates is a false prophet. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that Satan whispers in their ear. I think they're mistaken, but it's possible that the reason there are no signs given for the pre-trib rapture or for this departure is because it needs to be kept hidden from Satan, so that he's never really sure when this is going to go down. And also, that does not mean that the 70th week of Daniel, which is another way to describe the tribulation, begins right away. It may very well not begin until the 6th seal or first trumpet, but this doesn't mean that pre-trib believers are necessarily mistaken in reading the signs of the times, because those signs don't apply to the rapture itself. There are no signs. But if we're seeing signs of the tribulation about to begin, then we must be very close to it. And then that means that some of the seal judgments, if it doesn't begin, the wrath doesn't actually begin till the 6th seal, then there may be a gap of time between the rapture and the beginning of the judgments, or the beginning of the wrath of God. So, and there must be time somewhere in there for this world leader to emerge and sign this, or enforce the 7-year treaty that I talked about in the previous hangout. So, at any rate, I believe that the rapture happens, the church age ends before any of the rest of this begins. We're taken to heaven before even this first seal is opened. So we're not necessarily wrong in reading the signs of the times, but that they're not for us, and that and as I said here, by extension, if we see the signs of that approaching, that means that the departure or rapture itself must be even closer. The great error of many is date setting based on those signs. It should be obvious that the pre-trib view is incompatible with any other, since they have other events to watch for. The mid-trib view holds that the departure must come at either the 6th seal, and I'll talk more about that later, or the 7th trumpet, depending on which one is believed to mark the midpoint of the week. its proponents argue that the followers of Jesus are promised tribulation, yet the pre-trib view does not deny this. It shares with pre-trib the belief that the body of Christ is exempt. Body of Christ is another way to describe the church. We're, in some respects, called his body in the sense that we compose, the head and body are connected. In Greek thought, the head or the body grew out of the head. Okay, that's how babies, when they formed in the womb, the body grew out of the head. The head was the source of nourishment for the body afterwards, because you eat and it nourishes the body, but the body supports the head and takes it around and does stuff it wants to do. So they're interdependent. The head is not independent of the body. And so they depend on each other, and we are called Christ's body in this world because we are his hands in this world right now. He's not here directly. He's here through us, and so that's why we're supposed to do stuff and not sit on our hands. We're supposed to actually be doing things. So it shares with the mid-trib view, shares with pre-trib the belief that the body of Christ is exempt from the wrath of God, but it denies that wrath. It defines that wrath as limited to the last half of the 7 years. So that's the difference between pre-trib and mid-trib, and you will not believe how upset the mid-tribbers get about people who believe Jesus comes 3.5 years earlier. It's just ridiculous. So my biggest problem with the alternate viewpoints is how hostile they are to only the pre-trib view. They're all okay with you as long as you believe you're going to suffer. But if you believe you're going to escape the wrath of God, then they have a major problem with that, and I don't understand it. Post-trib holds that only the day of the Lord or the day of the Master, at the very end of the bowl judgments, I should briefly say the judgments are in order: seals, trumpets, bowls. Okay, bowls or vials that hold something. That the day of the Lord, when Jesus returns, and the day of wrath, and that happens at the very end, and is only part of a literal solar day. So they believe that Jesus will bring his people up to meet him on his way down to the earth to defeat the beast, which is kind of like, Jesus said he's the gate, the people, he is the true shepherd, and he is the gate, the way, the truth, and life. Well, this makes him the revolving door, so to speak, because he brings you up and throws you right back down, and I have troubles with that scenario. They believe that the body of Christ, the church, is protected during the 70th week, so at least, the first half of it. But that can't be true because it contradicts the great numbers of martyrs that come out of the first half of the tribulation. We'll see that when we get into the seals. And it leaves no, because the seals do reference the second half of the tribulation, believe it or not. That's a really interesting passage by itself, which is another reason why I save that for later. It also leaves no mortals on earth to repopulate it during the millennium. The millennium means 1,000 years. When we say the millennium, we're talking about the period of time prophesied to happen after the tribulation is over. It goes for 1,000 years. Jesus is on the earth ruling directly, and that there are going to be mortals during that time, because people will die, but they will live the long ages that they did before the time of Noah. They will live hundreds and hundreds of years at that time. So, but they will still die, which means they're still mortal. And so there have to be mortals on the earth that survive the tribulation and are righteous. So if the mid-trib is true and we're taken out before the end of it, then what mortal righteous people will be here by the end of the tribulation? It doesn't make any sense, especially with the pre-wrath or post-trib views. I'm sorry, I misspoke saying mid-trib. This is a post-trib view. So if he comes and changes us all to immortals and then puts us right back down on earth, then who is here to repopulate the place? And God isn't going to let bad people repopulate it. So it kind of paints them into a corner with how to solve this problem of repopulation after the tribulation. Likewise, the pre-wrath view holds that Jesus' statement, "those days will be cut short," in Matthew 24:22, allows a blending of the other views. The reign of the Antichrist is cut short. That's what they apply the days cut short to, purely on speculation, but this is what they believe, that the reign of the Antichrist is cut far short of his prophesied 3.5 years by the removal of the body of Christ. And then after 3.5 years, in other words, nothing happens on earth for 3.5 years. And then Jesus returns with all the elect, that is to say, the good people, the righteous people, to begin the millennium. Thus, the world is repopulated by those who come to faith after the departure, which here again, they solved the post-trib lack of mortals problem, righteous mortals, by saying that this is a very short-lived event, and so there's plenty of people left. All right, now those 24 elders, I already explained how I identified them as the church, and what the 24 means. Oh, this statement in chapter 5, verse 9. This is the one I was thinking I would wait till next time, but this is not. This is in chapter 5, not chapter 6. So I will do it now. The most significant detail is that they, the 24 elders, say to the Lamb, "You bought us for God by means of your blood." And I had a lag there. I was hoping I didn't freeze up. You bought us for God by means of your blood. Only humans could say this. So this is another reason why I believe these are humans who have been brought to heaven. Okay. And they're saying that they were redeemed by the Lamb's blood, the sacrifice of Jesus. Jesus is the Lamb. He is represented as a lamb in heaven. And at least part of the time, other times we've seen he's represented as a human-like, in his human-like form. So they're saying, you bought us. And I've read the scholarly Greek material on this, and it seems very clear that they are talking about themselves. Some Greek manuscripts will say, you bought them, because they want it to match the responding statement where the other beings around there that are not part of the 24 elders respond to them and say, this is what you did for them. But first they say, you bought us. So these, again, I believe represent the church as being out of the world before even the first seal is open. There are 4 creatures that I didn't mention because I didn't walk through the text in as much detail. There are 4 creatures which surround the throne as well, and they are represented. They are very reminiscent of the 4 angelic beings, you could say, in the book of Ezekiel, which sounds for all the world like a description of a UFO. I want to read that sometime. But they also, there's a lot of interpretation of what the various faces and attributes of these 4 creatures symbolize. I'm not going to get into that right now because it is so highly speculative. But they sing the song, and they are the one, about being bought, and they're the ones that respond to the elders. So I'm fairly well convinced that these elders represent the church in heaven. A little bit about the 4 animals or creatures. They're just in the Greek called living things. So that's why I called them creatures. Speculation on what they are. Some say that since the Holy Spirit is represented by the 7 lampstands, that these animals represent something about the attributes of God. Others that they represent the tribes of Judah because they are a lion, an ox, a man, and an eagle. And these 4 tribes would pitch their tents around the tabernacle. What was the tabernacle? I'm talking about Old Testament here again. It was a temporary tent-based temple that the people of Israel carried around with them. And whenever they set camp, these 4 tribes would position themselves north, south, east, and west of the tabernacle. And so that's what some people believe that these 4 creatures are representing. Others say that they have some connection to the prophecies of Daniel and Ezekiel as symbolic of certain angels or messengers. At any rate, they seem to indicate that the focus is on Israel rather than Christianity, further bolstering the view that all of Revelation beyond the 7 letters is post-church age. That's my opinion. At any rate, these elders have those crowns, and they throw them at the feet of God on the throne as in worship of him. And they also talk about the Lamb. So we've been talking about God on the throne, and now we're talking about the Lamb as representing Jesus, who is both God and man. And I went over that a little bit last time. Now they're beginning the actual judgments, and God on the throne holds a scroll with writing on both sides, and this is where we're going to start introducing what the seals are going to be about next time. It has 7 seals on it. So this is a scroll, And the seals have to be broken in a sequence, these 7 seals. There is a theory that that this scroll is the title deed to earth, which is to say, I believe that in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve had been given the earth as their authority, their thing to take care of, and they handed it to Satan by rebelling against God. So the Lamb has repurchased the title deed to the earth, and only he can open it. And we're getting, let me not get ahead of myself here. There is a strong angel or strong messenger who stands there and demands who is worthy to open the seals, and no one is found in heaven, on earth, or under the earth, as it says in the actual text. And John, it says, cries bitter tears because no one can open the seal. In other words, he's thinking that no one can redeem mankind. And because they can't open no one has been found who can break the seals and open the contract, so to speak. So then the Lamb, who is obviously Jesus, having been killed in sacrifice and symbolically portrayed as divine by this lamb, isn't just a lamb. It has 7 horns and eyes, and this is the number of completion, the number of God. And so this is the one who is shown as worthy to break the seals. So Jesus bought is the one whose blood bought the elders, the church, and now he is the one who bought back the world from Satan. So the one, as I go on here, one might expect to see him in heaven as the Lion of Judah, the one who had conquered. It is the sacrifice that bought worthiness to open those seals. So that's why it's portrayed as a lamb here. The time for taking back the kingdoms of the world is not yet. Those who had been worshiping God on the throne now fall before the Lamb as further support for this being Jesus, who is both divine and human. So in other words, they're going, finally, at last, one is worthy to open these seals, and he doesn't actually take back possession until all the seals are open. And we're going to see that the 7th seal initiates the rest of the judgments, that they're contained in the 7th seal, and that doesn't mean that they all happen that the 7th seal happens at the end of the tribulation. Some believe it does. I don't believe it does. I believe we still have a sequence, but the 7th seal is what opens the door for the 7th trumpet, the 7 trumpets, and then the 7th trumpet is what brings on the 7 bowls. And so there's a chain going on here, a chain of sequential events, and Jesus is the one who is opening these seals, which is important because when we get to covering the seals, we're going to see that someone else is portrayed that some people take as Jesus coming to conquer, but that couldn't be him because he's the one ordering this entity to come forth. So that's the first 5 chapters of Revelation. And I know I went awful fast, and there's so much I'm having to skip over, but it's already been going pretty long. We're almost at 2 hours. So I think I'm going to stop here, take questions, and anything else you guys want to talk about. Okay?
What was that mean?
I was taking a drink too, so it's just water, just water.
It's all very good. You follow the numbers, and I'm listening as well. And the numbers are the numbers of the void. The numbers are all over the place. A lot of repetitive numbers and different things that come up all the time. I didn't really see many questions after the last time you took a little break. I think Victoria said, "What do you think? Why do you think some people think we have to go through the whole tribulation as in be tested or purified?" with a question mark. Next, right underneath that is when Jesus already paid the price.
Right, exactly. That's an excellent question because that's one of the reasons I'm a pre-tribber, because Jesus did pay the price, and the reason we're considered righteous in God's eyes is not because we're so awesome, but because Jesus is, and we have identified with him by accepting his offer of being adopted as children of God. Hold on. My aging dog was having one of his coughing fits, so sorry. At any rate, the reason we're saved and called righteous is because of what Jesus did, and we, by accepting him by faith, we are being adopted as children of God, and that's why we're righteous. That's also the reason we're escaping the wrath of God, because Jesus cannot be suffering the wrath of God either. He's already done that. He did that on the cross. And so anybody who has put their trust in him, as the New Testament describes it, we have died with Christ. We're dead to the law when we are not under it anymore. And therefore, as Vic just posted there, yes, all glory goes to him, not to us. We're not so awesome. He is. And so there's no point and no justification, and will totally negate pretty much the whole gospel if the people who belong to Jesus and have been adopted by him have to go through the wrath of God. It makes no sense whatsoever. But there are so many people who think, I have to be tested. I was born for this, and I was put here for this purpose. Well, there's plenty of testing going on already. If you really want to be a warrior and all that physically and suffer and die, there's plenty of places in the world. Go to any Islamic country right now. They'll hand your head to you on a platter, quite literally. Hold on.
Yeah, that is true.
Sorry about that. Yeah, my poor old dog. Okay. But yeah, there's plenty of that to go around if anybody really wants to suffer like that. I mean, nobody will stop you. But the point is, you don't have to, and it doesn't prove anything. All it proves is that you don't understand where your righteousness comes from and what testing is all about. We're all tested in this life, some much more than others, and some physically, some spiritually, some mentally. We're tested in one way or another. Jesus promised suffering to his followers, but this particular suffering that Revelation is all about, and the book of Daniel chapter 9 is all about, 9 forward, is for, as it's stated very clearly, to test the earth dwellers, that is to say, those who are not adopted by God, who chose not to be, who didn't love the truth, and the Israelites who are there in unbelief in their land, which is a prerequisite for these things being literal prophecies, as I explained in the previous hangout. They're there in unbelief, so they've got judgments coming. They got 7 years of judgments awaiting them, especially the trumpets and bowl judgments are for them. They will encompass the whole world, but things are going to be especially bad for the Jews during that time. Mm-hmm. And of course, Christians too. Christians more get hit in the first half under the seal judgments. Not Christians in the sense of being the church, but Christians in the sense that they follow the Christ, but they were too late to be adopted as children of God because they chose not to before that. But they turned to God during the seal judgments, and so they are called the elect, the saints, and certain rewards await them, but they're not part of the church. And so a lot of people will turn to God during this time who are Gentiles, and most of them, if not all, well, most of them will be martyred. Many of them by beheading. That seems to be the preferred method. Satan likes to kill believers in God, is to chop off their heads. That's a thing with him for some reason. But there will also be Jews who turn to God during that time. There will be a remnant. Most of them will be wiped out. And I can back this up with something that happens at the end of the tribulation that Jesus talked about. Let me go find that quick in a more familiar translation, and it has a better search engine than I've got. I really don't code searches very well, and I don't care to. I've done all I can with that. But let me look up let me look this up real quick. Sheep and goats judgment. Let me spell it right. I can't spell and. Fat finger disease, or I call it keyboard dyslexia. Mm-hmm. Here we go. Let me get to there. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, which describes the end of the tribulation, not the beginning, not the rapture, then he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be assembled before him, and he will separate people from one another like a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right, the goats on his left. Then the king, he is called there, will say to those on his right, "Come, you are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you. I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and gave me drink. and you did all these things. And then the righteous will say, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you and all this? And he will say, when he will answer them, I will tell you the truth, just as you did it for one of the least of these brothers or sisters of mine, you did for me. Then he will say to them on his left, depart from me, you accursed, in the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels, for I was hungry and you didn't do these things for me. And they'll say, when did we not see you do these things? And he says, just as you did not do it for one of the least of these, you did not do it for me. And these will depart. I hate it when it does that. I don't know why. These will depart to eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. So what I'm trying to key on here is that these are the people who are, he's separating people when he comes back at the end of all the judgments and saying, these are the ones who are going to go forward and repopulate the earth. These are the mortals. But there's three groups of people here: the sheep, the goats, and the least of these. Because both of them the sheep and the goats are being judged and separated on the basis of how they treated the least of these. So who are the least of these? Well, the sheep are, sheep and goats seem to be Gentiles, and I think the least of these are the Jews. How did you treat the Jews during this time? They were practically almost completely wiped out. Some survived. These were the righteous ones who survived. And the Gentiles at that time, instead of being on the basis of whether they believed in God and Jesus, because it was quite obvious that they're real at this point and all throughout the judgments, but he's saying, how did you treat the least of these? How did you treat my people, the Jews? And if you were, treated them like as if you would treat me, you are the righteous one. You are going to repopulate the earth. You are the bad ones. You're not. You're out of here. So that's why I'm saying this is the basis for what I was saying earlier about righteous mortals and repopulating the world after the judgments is over. So there have to be mortals who are righteous, who were not raptured and not part of the church. So the rapture has to happen before this, and that's where I got that. So that was the I forget why I wanted to do that quick, but that's where Jesus talks about how it's going to be when he comes back. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there will be plenty of opportunities for people to suffer then, but once again, it's the wrath of God, and those who belong to Jesus have vicariously through him, through aligning with him, already suffered the wrath of God that he suffered on the cross, and therefore we cannot suffer it again. So that's why we're not going to be here for that. And as I said, in one of those churches in Revelation, in the 7 letters, they were taken out of the time and place for being faithful. So that's where I put these pieces. They're all over the place, but they can be put together. It takes a lot of time and a lot of study, but it can be done. And this is why I get so short-tempered sometimes with people who say, I read the Bible and I got it all figured out. No, you don't. I still don't have it all figured out, but I've gotten some progress done. And I think, it does, if you put the work into it. And a lot of times I see people make pronouncements about this stuff that they clearly have not put the work into it. I'm like, okay, you can have your opinion and I could be wrong. You could be right, just as a broken clock is right twice a day.
Correct.
Right by accident. But, and I could be wrong in spite of studies, and I freely admit that. But at least I have a good reason for believing what I do, and that's all I ask of anybody else.
That's good. That's good. Maybe put on as you're nearing the end, of the hangout. Maybe the next one, starting with chapter 6, I believe, and
yes.
Go on from there. When might that be?
I haven't thought that far ahead. I only know what chapter I'm going to do next. I don't know. I think people like to have a couple days notice. That seemed to work a little better. I don't know. I don't think we had very many people, at least according to the watch count, but at least there won't be any, because of not having enough notice. So I'm thinking, I don't know, today is Tuesday. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is Thursday too soon? I'm not sure I want to do Friday or not, if people are busy or there's a lot of other popular hangouts. I don't want to make people have to choose between them is all. It's not like I need permission, but.
Well, of course. Yeah. It might be something to do maybe next Monday or something. Maybe wait for the weekend and do it that way. Or
I don't know if I want to wait too long, because you want to kind of keep things fresh in people's minds. But I I don't know. I did the first one on a Saturday. So I'm thinking either Friday or Saturday. Is I might talk to some people offline after this and see what anybody thinks.
Okay, good. Well, that's good.
So
Yeah, it's good to get it out there at the end to just give people a little bit of a heads up. You know, you had a bunch watch the first one, and you know, some here, and of course the count is, well, we know how the counts work.
right. So
Yeah,
I'm thinking.
yeah, different videos, girls bikini failure, and they get like 5 million hits in like a day
Yeah.
and a half.
Maybe
Yeah, exactly.
maybe I'll just do Saturday. Maybe I'll do a Tuesday Saturday pattern for a while.
Oh,
Maybe that would
okay.
work. That would be at least somewhat consistent. Vic had one more question, I think. Enoch and Elijah, yes, Elijah actually, not Elisha. He was Elijah's successor. But Enoch, the Book of Enoch guy, was an example of someone who was taken to heaven without dying. The Old Testament just says, or I think the New Testament references him and says, Enoch walked with God, and then he was no more, for God took him. So there's no reference, even though this was in the Old Testament, you see the list of genealogy of people from Adam who lived so many years, then died, and this son lived so many years and died, and so on. And you never see that about Enoch. He was just taken. The other was Elijah, the prophet Elijah, who was handing over his prophetic ministry to his successor Elisha, and they were walking along, and suddenly this is where you get the phrase chariots of fire. A chariot that seemed to be aflame or lit up somewhere or another came down from heaven and took Elijah up while Elisha watched. And so that's where you get the phrase chariots of fire comes from that. So he was another example of someone who was taken to heaven without dying. So the idea of people going to heaven without dying is not unprecedented. We have these two examples from the Old Testament. But as I don't know if I went through the specific scriptures, but I mentioned it, that in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul describes the rapture event as where, first of all, the dead who were Christians in the past, but they died, are when Jesus comes down to the sky, he doesn't touch the earth. He raises the dead Christians in immortal bodies, and then he transformed those who are already living into immortals, and we're all taken up at the same time. So those of us who are alive when Jesus comes back in the rapture will not have to die. And that's not unprecedented at all, because we have these two examples at least, and not to mention the express statements in the Bible that we who are alive and remain will be taken up to meet the Lord in the air. So we are contrasted with the dead. We don't have to die. There's no indication that we die. So that's, again, my opinion, but there you go. So I'm thinking Saturday, probably we'll just keep the 8 o'clock time slot. Tuesdays and Saturdays 8, as far as I can, unless anybody, something comes up. Sometimes that happens or whatnot. Alrighty. Well, I guess it's time to say thanks for everyone who came, and maybe some I missed I didn't see. For Larry for hanging out on the panel with me, and
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Brian was there too, watching things, and Vic and their questions, and Jimmy's questions. We'll get to them all eventually. It's just I'm trying to stay on topic. You know how I am about that. And I saw Pillbox there. Stefan. Yeah.
Yep. And Stefan was out there?
Yep. And if I missed anybody, sorry about that. But I will set up the next one maybe tomorrow, as soon as tomorrow, so I don't forget to do this on Saturday night at 8. Yeah, and if we were going to have a movie night, usually we have movie nights on Saturdays, but lately there's been people there, our kids have had too much homework or whatnot. We can always move the time or the day for that if we have to. So I'll let you guys know.
Okay, good hangout.
All right. Thanks everybody again, and I will push the stop button. I found it this time a little bit quicker. And I'm going to get good at this someday.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good thing.
All right.
Peace, everyone.
All right. See you guys.